Well, tonight we are going to conquer chapters 4 and 5, the Lord willing. We are going to have another census. You know, when they say, oh, this a census for the soldiers and then a census of the Levites. And you remember the last time we were together, the census for the Levites was 1 year old and above. So because they weren't going to war, they didn't count them from 20 years old and above, 20-year-old and above. But now, as they were talking last chapter about, hey, everybody's going to have a portion, we're going to break the Levites into the sons of not Aaron, but before Aaron, and Aaron's dad or grandpa or great-great-great-grandpa was of the Kohathites, but then there was also the Gershonites and then the sons of Merari. And so they're broken down into those three. But now they need another census because who's going to actually practically do the work? And they estimated that it would be men from 30 years old to 50 years old that would do the heavy lifting. Now, as we get to chapter 8, we will find out that they do another, not a census necessarily, but they do another counting saying, okay, from 25 to 30 will be the training time. So evidently something happened saying, 30 to 50, and well, it takes a few years to train them because you didn't know when you were moving, right? So, I mean, the cloud stays, you don't tear it down. But then when the cloud moves, it might be a week, it might be a month, it might be several years. And everybody's scratching their head and getting out the books and refreshing themselves on who does what, where, and when. So they said, the chances of us moving in 5 years, so from 25 years old to 30 years old would be the training, so it doesn't eat into the 30 to 35-year-olds using up part of their time in training. So they'd be well trained ahead of time. And so this is what we find in chapter 4, that the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, take a census of the sons of Kohath among the children of Levi and their families by their father's house, this time, not from 1 month old and above, but from 30 years old all the way up to 50 years old, and all who enter the service to do the work of the tabernacle of meeting. So in the earlier counting in chapter 3 last week, we saw there was 8,600 males in chapter 3. But now we're going to be looking at those of the Kohathites who were 30 to 50. And I know you got that, but I just want to restate it once again. Now, just a quick little note here, because this question may come up. When we looked last time in the book of Exodus, do you remember this? There was a whole chapter on the lineage of Aaron and Moses. Well, Gershon is the oldest son of the Levite clan. The second son was Kohath, and then the third son, Merari. So why is it that the second son has been chosen to be the favored son, if you would, the more prestigious son, if you would, to touch the holy articles of the tabernacle and that of the high priest? I don't know. God's sovereignty, he does this quite a bit, doesn't he? He sort of sets the apple cart. He did that with Isaac and Ishmael, right? He did that with Jacob and Esau. He did that with Joseph and Reuben. Joseph was one of the second to the youngest son. Moses and Aaron. Aaron was the older brother, right? And then David, he was the youngest of all his brothers, and there's other examples. And so most people think that the reason they chose 30 to 50 is that's sort of when a man's the strongest physically in his lifetime, and you get up over 50, you can start breaking stuff, I guess, hurting stuff. I don't know. I go to the pastor's conference, and I always see a guy like in his 30s, and he's got a broken leg or a broken arm, and I always say to him, "Did you teach your son how to skateboard?" And he's like, "How did you know?" It's like in his mind, because in your mind, you're still 17 years old. Now, son, come here. I know you're not getting that ollie down. Let me show you how I did it when I was a teenager. And sure enough, things break. Well, I guess that was sort of the idea there as well. Some commentators take this as into a New Testament principle. Adam Clark did, that pastors should train up to the age of 30, and then not until they're 30 years old do they become a pastor. Because we're going to discover that the kings like David and stuff were 30, and of course Jesus was 30, right? And so they actually take that literally, and then at 50 you need to quit pastoring and be a teacher at a Bible college, or maybe sort of a mentor to a young pastor who's starting to pastor, that kind of thing. It just practically never quite works out that way. Well, verse 4 to 14 now, we're going to learn about this. Then the service of the sons of Kohath in the tabernacle of meeting relating to the most holy things. This is his job, the Kohathites. When the camp prepares to journey, listen now, Aaron and his sons, his only two living sons now are Eleazar and Ithamar, right? Because Nadab and Abihu died. So it would be Aaron and his two sons, and they shall take down the covering veil and cover the ark of the testimony. So you're to take down the curtain that separates the one part of the temple from the Holy of Holies, and you're to take down that covering, and you're to fold it up somehow, and then you're to cover the ark with that covering. And this is Aaron and his sons only do this. And then when you get that done, you put some badger skins on top of it, and you entirely cover it with blue, and you stick in the poles. So all that the Kohathites would see is this beautiful blue covering over badger skins. You wouldn't see the curtain of the Holy of Holies. You wouldn't see the Ark of the Covenant. And you remember the Ark of the Covenant sort of have a big peak to it, So this would be interesting to see how they actually did this. Did they roll it up and put the roll around the cherubim above, and then they put, it would have been interesting to see how practically that worked out. But the Kohathites would just see the poles. And even on this, we will learn later that not even Aaron or his sons were to look at it. They were to cover up the Ark of the Covenant and all the other holy things backwards. Somehow they were to do it with just sort of getting a glimpse out of the corner of their eye, but not looking directly at it. Then they do that with the table of showbread, and once again, they're covering with blue. Also, don't forget the dishes and the pans and the bowls and the pitchers and all the different instruments for the table of showbread. And they shall spread over it scarlet cloth, red, beautiful blood red, and cover the same with the covering of badger skins, and then insert the poles. So this is interesting. So it appears that there is blue on that, but I would think that blue would be on the top of that, but it doesn't appear. It appears that the red is on the top of that. And I'm trying to picture this, as you're walking with it. People from afar looking down, and they see these guys, and that ark. Remember, the ark was solid gold. That whole top of the mercy seat with the cherubim. They estimate that thing being hundreds of pounds. So these guys, man, you got a few guys on it, but they couldn't have carried it too far without having setting it down. But from afar, it would have been this beautiful red color, beautiful blue color. And then it tells us as we go on here, they shall take a blue cloth, verse 9, and cover the lampstand of the light now. So we had the ark, we have the table of showbread, the curtain was the first thing, and now the lampstand. And they will put a blue cloth on it. And then with all the other things, the wicker trims, the trays, the oils, the vessels, everything with that. And they shall put it with all its utensils and coverings and the badger skins, and put it on a carrying beam. So they had a special way to put all this away so it didn't, turn over or get broken. It was a special type of bench that it was sending it upon that would be able to be able to do all this and keep it organized without being broken or spilled. And then after that, verse 11, the golden altar, they shall spread blue cloth on it with the covering of badger skins, and they shall insert the poles. And they shall take all the utensils of the service which they minister in the sanctuary and put blue cloth, cover them with the covering of badger skins, and put them on the carrying beam. Also they shall take away the ashes of the altar. Remember outside now, around the altar, the ashes they would put there at various times. Some they would take outside, but some of them were there. They spread a purple cloth over it, and they shall put on it the implements which they minister there, and the fire pans and the forks and the shovels and the basins and the utensils of the altar shall spread it with the covering badger skins inside the purple poles. And again, all these things, especially the book of Numbers, speaks of Christ. So you've got the blue, and then you've got the red, and then you've got some more blue. And then as you get down to the altar of sacrifice, it's purple. And again, the scarlet there upon the showbread, I believe, is Jesus being the bread of life, who was crucified for us and bled. And of course, he was God in royalty when he was upon the altar. He really was God. And so there's a lot of insights that you could stop and speculate on, and I do think it speaks of Christ. But moving on to verse 15 to 20 now. When the sons of Aaron now have finished covering the sanctuary and all its furnishing and all the sanctuary, when the lamp is set to go, then the sons of Kohath shall come to carry them, but they shall not touch any holy thing, lest they die. These are the things in the tabernacle of meeting which the sons of Kohath are to carry. Appointed duty of Eleazar. So who oversees the Kohathites? The oldest son, Eleazar, is the guy in charge of the Kohathites. He's the one who went in with his dad and his brother and covered everything up, and now he's telling the guys how to carry it. And it appears to me that they're carrying it in place. Like this is how they do it. So when we walk into the tabernacle, you have outside you have the altar and the basin, the golden basin for water, and then inside you have the table of showbread on the right, and the lamp on the left, and the incense in front of the curtain and the ark. It seems like they're uncovered and they're put in place. And so when they carry them, they sort of keep the same distance and keep the same pace. So again, as we've talked about, it makes the shape of a cross. If you take away all the coverings and just look at them in place, it's the shape of a cross. And then, of course, on the bigger scale, with all the population, as we've talked about, that also looks like a cross. So it's a small cross inside a big cross, and it's being carried with all of these various beautiful blues and reds and purples. And so once everything is covered and ready, then Eleazar will bring in the Kohathites. And the appointed Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, is the oil for the light, the sweet incense, the daily grain offering, the anointing oil, the oversight of the tabernacle of all that's in it, and the sanctuary and the furnishings. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, do not cut off the tribe of the families of the Kohathites from among the Levites, but do this in regards to them, that they may live and not die when they approach the most holy things. Aaron and his sons shall go in at an appointed, each of them to his service and his task. But they shall not go in to watch while the holy things are being covered, lest they die. So he basically says, these guys are doing a very dangerous job. Aaron, Moses, Eleazar, slap them in the face, throw some water on them, do whatever you got to do for them to understand that if they don't do exactly as the Lord has instructed, just like their brother and Nadab and Abihu, they're going to die. Don't let it happen. How do you not let it happen? By helping them understand this is a holy job unto the Lord, and the slightest irreverence to these holy things, you can die. Of course, I could stop and tell you about the story of David putting the ark on the cart, right? Or even an earlier story when the Philistines took it. And remember, they were all getting hemorrhoids and all kinds of problems. And they finally said, let's get this thing out of here. And they put it on a cart, and they got some cows, and the cows just went straight to where they were supposed to go. Even though they were female cows leaving their little ones behind, they still left their little ones and went towards Jerusalem. But what happened when the Israelis saw the ark? I've always wanted to take a look at it, and they're gawking at it. And then they do what? They try to take a peek inside, and thousands of them died. So again, we can say this was not just a beware story, a cautionary tale without real substance with it, because we will later see people die because they did not move it, look at it, touch it in the holy way God has required. And of course, this is the nature of God, isn't it? Jesus taught us to pray, Our Father. In Hebrew, that's the word Abba, Daddy. Our Father, Daddy, who art in what? Heaven. Holy be your name. So even though you have intimacy and you feel comfortable, He is still, God's in heaven, you're on earth, and you are not holy, and He is. And so there still needs to always be that sense of the beginning of knowledge and the beginning of wisdom is what? To fear God. And to fear God means to depart from evil. In this case, being lackadaisical or being what's the word I'm looking for? Not being as diligent as you should be to pay attention with what you're doing. Well, now we go over to Gershon in verse 21 to 23, and we'll find the same things, that he has to pick people, 30 to 50, and to perform the service. Now, the reason I want to stop here in verse 23, all who enter to perform the service. The reason I want to point that out, because of the Hebrew word here. There's really not even an English way to write it. It's sort of S-E-B-A, but even that's not correct. It's the word that sounds Seba. And this is the word that we will find later to fight and to go to war, or to muster the people to go to war. So the way they would have heard it is, get your guys together to go to war, to do the work of the ministry. And in essence, even though they weren't supposed to be soldiers in the physical sense, they were still soldiers, right? In the spiritual sense. And in essence saying, see yourselves as soldiers, not as little wimpy priests, lighting candles and burning incense. See yourself as a man's man. See yourself in your priestly outfit as a soldier in God's army as you do your part in moving this tabernacle. Pretty powerful, isn't it? Well, verse 24 to 28, talking about the Gershonites and what they were to carry the rest of the curtains, not the Holy of Holy curtain, but the rest of them, of the tabernacle meeting with its coverings, with the badger skins and the screen for the door, and the tabernacle meeting, the screen for the door of the gate, and the hanging of the court, all the tabernacle and the altar, their cords and their furnishings of their service. They made these things, they shall serve. Aaron and his sons shall assign all the service of the sons of the Gershonites and all their tasks and all their service, and you shall appoint to them all their tasks and their duties. And this is the service of the families of the sons of Gershon in the tabernacle of meeting, and their duty shall be under the authority of who? Ithamar. Who's in charge of the Kohathites? Eleazar. Those who's in charge of the Gishonites, Ithamar, Aaron's son. Then we go down to verse 29 to 30. Now we have the sons of Merari, who are 30 to 50 to do their part. And in verse 31 to 33, it says, and this is what they must carry, all their service for the tabernacle of meeting, the boards of the tabernacle, its bars, its pillars, its sockets, and the pillars around the court with their sockets and pegs and cords and all their furnishings and all their services. And you shall assign each man by name the items he must carry. It's so intricate. There's so many little wooden pegs and little metal grommets and, metal that hooks the metal together and wood that hooks the wooden pole together, that they basically had to break this out and say, okay, you're responsible for 4 wooden pegs, 3 metal hooks, whatever it is, and they somehow put their name on it. And so everybody had to give an account one by one. This would be very accounted of all these little tiny intricate parts, because every part is important, isn't it? I mean, imagine if you are missing just one bolt or one wooden peg. All of a sudden you have something that should be very strong, not strong at all. And notice in verse 33, the service of the families of the sons of Merari and all the service for the tabernacle of meeting are under the authority of Ithamar. What? He's having to do double duty, isn't he? And let me tell you, he's doing, the 2 things that he's doing have a lot of parts. Over the Gershonites and over Merari, it's a lot of responsibility. Why is so much of the burden laid upon Ithamar? We know, don't we? Leviticus 10. His brothers got happy feet, were drinking alcohol, and offered a sacrifice that God did not prescribe, and they died. And it's just a warning to remember that we're not replaceable, right? I mean, God did that with our DNA. If I die, my DNA goes with it. It's not like, oh, there's 10 more people that have the same exact DNA I have. It doesn't exist, does it? They estimate that not even 2 hairs are identical. That when you look under the microscope, that there's just a little bit difference of a shape, of a thickness, of oil to dryness to types. It's amazing how unique every one of us are, and we're not replaceable. And when somebody isn't there, somebody else who's already got a handful themselves have to do more than their fair share and carry the burden. And that's exactly what we're seeing, a lacking of 2 of the sons, but yet a greater of a burden upon Ithamar. And it tells us now in verse 34 to 48, the Moses and Aaron and the leaders of the congregation numbered the sons of Kohathites by their families and by their father's house, 30 years old and above to 50, every one who entered the service of the work of the tabernacle of meeting. Verse 36, and those who were of the number of the families were 2,750. These are the ones who were numbered of the family of the Kohathites, all who might serve in the tabernacle of meeting, for Moses and Aaron numbered according to the commandments of the Lord at the hand of Moses. Then you got the number of the Gershonites, which is 2,630. And then you got the sons of Merari, verse 42, and we discover after that there's 3,200 men. So when we go down and add them all up, we come up with 8,580. That's a substantial number. Think about that just a minute. You got that tabernacle, which is about, smaller than this room. We talked about from that peg to that peg over there, and inside, and the Holy of Holies is 15 by 15. It's not a very big building, but then the outer courts, that was 75 by 150 feet or yards? Yards. And it wasn't that huge either, but when you have 8,580 guys, they estimate if everybody had their part and they knew what they were doing, once everything was covered up, That was going to take the long time, getting everything prepared to be moved. That they estimate it was probably minutes, less than a half an hour, for them to pack everything up, be ready to go. Interesting. Now, I would not believe that number unless I saw how quick we on Wednesday nights pack up to go. I mean, I don't think any of us are under 50. But yet, we packed that thing up. I mean, the tables, the chairs, the podium, the sound equipment, all that. Boom. I mean, how long is it? 8 minutes, maybe? I mean, it's truly extraordinary. I remember as a kid, there was always the carnival in town, and it wasn't too far from where I lived. And you'd go by, and of course today, they have all the rides and everything, and all the glitter lights and everything. And you're looking at it, you drive by it one evening, and the next morning you come by, looks like they'd never been there. And then you go a town over, and there it is, the next day. In the night, they tore it down and set it up somewhere else. It's pretty amazing when you have this orchestrated way of doing it, even without the help of the Lord, just something as carnal as a carnival. It's amazing how man can organize and get things done quickly. Well, in verse 49, according to the commandment of the Lord, they were numbered by the hand of Moses, each according to the service and according to his task. Thus they numbered by him as the Lord commanded Moses. So once again, as the Lord commanded Moses, so Moses did, exactly as the Lord did. Now, sort of as your homework here, you can read 1 Corinthians 12 through 31. You guys know the passage well, right? As the body has many members. And it goes on to say not one part of that body is insignificant, right? And if a part did have a lesser visible, glorious part, he says God is going to give him a greater glory. You see, I think it's going to be flipped when we get to heaven. I think all the glorious parts of the church on this earth are going to be on the back row. And those quiet servants who went and did their serving without people even knowing they served, they're going to be on the front row of that afterglow. But here he makes it clear that every part God puts in place as he pleases. Ephesians 4 says that every part doing its share causes the growth of the body. Everybody's part, every little screw and bolt and wooden dowel, every one of them, lacking none, is absolutely essential for a strong, sturdy tabernacle and for us in the temple. Well, in chapter 5 now, he does want to make a mention as you're packing up and getting ready to move, you've been tending to the sick. Now, they're not going to leave them behind and say, you guys stay here and die in the desert. You can come along, but how does that work? So in chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, he says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, whoever becomes defiled by a corpse. Now, we've covered this, haven't we? In Leviticus 13, Leviticus 15, Leviticus 21, we've gone into detail. But in essence, he's saying, as you're getting ready to move in this shape of a cross, in this giant millions of people, you're going to have sort of a group of people following at a distance, probably from behind. If you would, it would be like the hospital follows them. It's like people that are being quarantined that, remember, it's like, oh, is this wound? It's a bright spot, but, does it stay? The priest says, well, we got to check that out and see if it turns into something more important. And then if it goes away, the priest says, oh, yeah, you're clean. And then they have to do a sacrifice and all that, which you can't really do if you're on the move. You got to wait till everything gets put back up, right? So they would sort of be on the outside, having to walk at a distance. So they're discharged, or they know for sure they're lepers, or they have touched a dead corpse because their son died in their arms, or their dad died, or whatever. You've been around the dead. Well, you can't join with your family in your ranks on the west side or the north side. You've got to be a part of this quarantined hospital of people that will be following along from behind. So in essence, God is saying, be organized, and I need you to be marching purified. The people, the promised land people, need to be a purified, holy people as well. And he says in verse 3 and 4, you shall put out both male and female. Well, we're not going to put females out on the outer. Yep, females too. You shall put them outside the camp, and they shall not defile their camps in the midst of which I dwell. This is not defiling in a physical way. This is talking about a purification, impurity. And the children of Israel did so and put them outside the camp as the Lord spoke to Moses, so as the children of Israel did. And so we remember Paul telling us how he put in 1 Timothy 1, Alexander and Hymenaeus outside the camp so they would learn not to blaspheme, remember? And then the guy who married his stepmom, he said, put him outside the camp that his body might be destroyed, that his soul might be saved. And then in 2 Corinthians, he said, hey, the guy's no longer impure. Bring him back into the camp. Go out and get him and bring him back in. So spiritually, I think we can see that. It's interesting at the very end of the book of Revelation when it talks about heaven in Revelation 21:27, but there will by no means enter in anything that defiles or causes abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So only the purified whose names are written in the Lamb book of life will go into that heavenly tabernacle. And so we see where it's headed in this. And now verse 5 through 7, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, when a man or a woman commits any sin that men commit an unfaithfulness against the Lord, and that person is guilty, he shall confess the sin which he has committed. He shall make restitution for his trespass in full, plus 1/5, 20%, and give it to the one he has wronged. So here it's really Reader's Digest, but the idea is if somebody stole something or deceived somebody. Remember, we went through this again in detail in Leviticus. And so this isn't just your sin offering, this is your trespass offering. And remember, in the trespass offering, there has to be a restitution made to God and to the person. And so he says, it's best that you just confess your sin. We know Proverbs 28:13, he who covers a sin will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. So he's saying that you're going to be sort of, if you would, impure, but it's not on the outside where people can see it, but you know it. You know that there's sin going on. It's not on the outside like leprosy or some kind of discharge, but inside, I've been carrying this for days, weeks, months, years. And you know what? I can't walk with the throng of God's people with this burden on my heart. Has God ever done that to you? Where he puts his thumb on something, and then the thumb starts getting heavier and heavier and heavier until you finally just buckle. And you just say, okay, Lord, I'm going to come clean, and things are going to be revealed. And of course, on a practical basis, you can just imagine how this would be going on. If somebody in your group, you're going to war, and you know he has something against you. He thinks you stole from him or cheated him, and now you're side by side in battle, and you've got this anger issue or this unresolved issue with this person. How's that going to work in battle? It's not going to work in battle, is it? And so in the same way, he says to the priests, when you guys gather up stuff and you're walking, it's like you're marching with the tabernacle stuff like a man goes to war. And so in essence, that's the way everybody was marching, like a big, giant military group. And as we're going to see later on in the book of Numbers, that's the way the people in the Promised Land saw it, and they were afraid. Now, you may say, well, I'll confess it when the guy dies. Then I don't have to pay the trespass. Well, God's got that figured out. But if a man has no relatives to whom the restitution may be made for the wrong, so his wife's no longer living, he doesn't have a son or a cousin or an uncle or an aunt or somebody, well, the restitution for the wrong must go to the Lord for the priest. In addition to the ram of the atonement, which we know about that from Leviticus, which atonement is made for him. So you're thinking, man, I can wait this thing out until I don't have to pay. And God says, look, there is going to come a time when it does come to light, and you're going to have to talk to a human being. All his relatives may be dead and gone. The guy you offended may be dead and gone. It'll be a priest you're talking to, but you are going to confess it, and you are going to pay the full restitution with 20% and pay for the ram being sacrificed in its place. You're not going to get away from dealing with this issue. Now, verse 9 and 10 has a really interesting point. Every offering of all the holy things of the children of Israel, which they bring to the priest, shall be his. Every man's holy thing shall be his. Whatever any man gives to the priest shall be his. Why do you think God has to say this? Because the blacksmith and the carpenter and the guys who have jobs that are physical labor later on, like in farming and stuff, and they're going, I have to bring my tithes and the offerings, and these priests get part of my sacrifice, and they get the tithes. That's their allowance. That's their money. And they don't have to work hard like I do. And I just think these priests, there's so many of them down there, they're just lazing around, sponging off the rest of the nation. Here's your tithe. Not that you really work for it. And so this can rub off on the priest. Let me tell you what, a man, and that's why I think our welfare system is really hurting, especially the black community of our nation. Because a man has a self-esteem, takes his pride in his work. And there is something about having a job that you're worthy of the wages. And of course, Paul steps into this in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. Remember this? Where he says, hey, is it such a thing that if I labor in spiritual things, I shouldn't take of that harvest? He goes, I haven't. As an apostle, I haven't. But those who are ministering with you as pastors, do not muzzle the ox while he threshes out the grain. A laborer is worthy of the hire. And so he's saying here, these priests, you may not see it, you may not know it. It's in the tabernacle. You don't know what's going on. They're there day after day. They're rotating in and out. Everybody's working hard. And let me tell you, hoisting up those animals and cutting them, and it would have been work doing it day after day. I've learned no matter how easy your job is, it's a grind. If you're doing it, it's part of the sin of Adam and Eve, right? By the sweat of our brow. So he basically tells these priests, this isn't theirs and you're sponging off them. No, you worked for it. You earned it. This is your money. Be proud of what you've worked for and earned. Now, in verse 11 through 13 is a rather bizarre passage. Interesting passage. And it's basically dealing with the spirit of jealousy. And this is where a guy gets stuck in his craw that his wife has been unfaithful to him. Maybe she didn't have sex with the guy, but she definitely did something. There's some kind of emotional affair going on, or, they may have kissed, or there's something romantic going on with somebody, and he can't get over this feeling. I've seen this. I remember counseling one couple years ago, and the woman in this case was just constantly, and we finally figured out she was watching soap operas all day where everybody's cheating on each other. And this demonic spirit, I think, took an advantage of her and got a hold of her brain until she was putting from those shows onto the guy, her own husband, who was at work. And finally, through prayer, we just sort of broke that spirit. But she couldn't move. She was completely trapped because she had this suspicion. Now, I've dealt with a lot of police officers and military men and chaplains for the police and chaplains for the military. This is one thing they go over, because when the guys go away for 6 months on Westpac or are gone for longer a time in the military, both ends, they get in their brain that the other person's cheating on them. And they actually have a whole discipleship package on this very point. But often I've seen it where they just get this stronghold in their brain. Now, I will say, a big percentage of the time when the guy is saying, I think my wife's cheated on me, it's because he has cheated on his wife. Unresolved, nobody knows. But he's taking his sin. What's it say in Romans 2 when you judge? You're judging because you're doing the same thing yourself. So he's, in his heart, it's deceiving him. And he's saying, I see things that my wife's doing or saying or acting that makes me think that she's cheating on me, when really it's from his own sin that's making him think that way. So in this case, this thing that the husband believes is hidden from his eyes, there's no witnesses, nobody can confirm it, nobody is saying, oh yeah, I saw that too, I think that's happening. Matter of fact, everybody is saying, I think you're wrong. But the guy can't let it go. He can take his wife and bring her to the priest. Now, let me tell you, this would be something that the whole community would know about. And this guy is either going to be confirmed or he's going to look like an idiot. Right? I mean, I really don't know, outside of God healing him, if that spirit, just because his wife didn't prove it at this time doesn't mean. So there's this elaborate thing. In verse 15, he shall bring an offering required of her 1/10 of an ephah of barley meal. So he's going to bring a grain offering, but not a grain offering like any other grain offering. Because in this grain offering, there is no oil, no frankincense, or let me say this, nothing to make it sweet. In the grain offering, there was always oil and frankincense. So the offering, the grain offering of barley, was not a bitter offering, but a sweet offering. But in this case, it's only the grain, which is a bitter offering. And this is an offering for remembering, for bringing iniquity to remembrance. So it's a barley offering, nothing else, only this grain offering, no oil, no frankincense, no sweetness. It's just a bitter thing. Now, in verse 16 to 28, this priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord, and the priest shall take the holy water in an earthen vessel and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, put it in the water, and the priest shall stand the woman before the Lord, uncover the woman's head, and put the offering for remembering in her hands, which the grain offering of jealousy, and the priest shall have it in his hand, and the bitter water that brings a curse. And the priest shall put her under oath and say to the woman, if no man has laid with you, and if you have not gone astray in the uncleanness while under your husband's authority, be free from this bitter water that brings a curse. But if you have gone astray and under your husband's authority, and if you have defiled yourself, and some man other than your husband has laid with you, then the priest shall put the woman under the oath of the curse, and he shall say to the woman, the Lord make you a curse and the oath among your people. And when the Lord makes you, your thigh rot and your belly swell. And this word, it's really talking about the womb. Not so much her stomach bloating up, but her womb is being damaged. She won't be able to have kids. And in verse 22, and may this water that causes the curse go into your stomach and make your belly swell and your thigh rot. And the woman will say, amen, so be it. I'm ready. Let me have a drink. Then the priest shall write these curses in the book, and he shall scrape them off into the bitter water. And he shall make the woman drink the bitter water that brings a curse, and the water that brings a curse shall enter her to become bitter. And so not that it's going to taste bitter, but it's saying spiritually it's bitter. So it's not necessarily a concoction that's going to taste bad. That's not what it's saying at all. Verse 25, then the priest shall take the grain offering of the jealousy from the woman's hand and shall wave the offering before the Lord and bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take a handful of offering in the memorial portion and burn it to the altar, and afterwards make the woman drink the water. When he has made her drink the water, then it shall be, if she has defiled herself and behaved unfaithfully towards her husband, the water that brings a curse shall enter her, become a bitter, and her belly will swell, her thigh will rot, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she shall be free and may conceive children. So there you see the insight of that. And so you say, what's going on here? This sounds sort of like witchcraft, some weird potion going on here. You know what I think? I think the process of this, him reading all of this and getting the dust and getting the water, and she's standing there and her husband's there and the community is looking on and the priests are looking on. This is front page news, and he's explaining what's going to happen for the 10th time. Did you notice how long and drawn out that was? It's like, I think I could have said that in a second, but yet it's like many, many verses. That I think as this thing builds, she's like, I confess. I don't think she ever got to the drinking of it. I think that the pressure of this whole scenario would be great. But nevertheless, what is this a picture of? The bride and the husband. Jesus says an interesting thing in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if it's possible, let what? Let this cup pass from me. Now, people quickly say, the cup of suffering, the cup of, carrying the sins of the people, the cup of, we can say that, but this is the cup, I think. The cup of our defilement. That cup that should cause our belly to rot, our womb to explode, us to be condemned. But instead of the wife drinking it, the husband drinks it. And Jesus on the cross, even though had we drunk that cup of sin, of wrath, of unfaithfulness, of wickedness, we would have died. Now, this also is an interesting thing, because remember when Mary was found to be with child, that Joseph did not make this thing public. He was going to put her away quietly, move her to another town on the opposite side of the country or something. And then the Lord spoke to her and said, no, she's not been unfaithful to you. Take her as wife. But it would have been a big deal had she been pregnant while she was betrothed, which is good as being married in these days. And so we can say at the end of this story, if we were brought by the law to have to drink, we would be guilty. But Christ bore our sins. In his body, he drank that bitter cup of our sins. And there he sweat with blood dropping to the ground. Father, for the third time, if there's any way, let this cup pass from me. Sort of a building. So I say, as I read this whole thing, and there's so many verses I'm reading, it's like, for the 10th time, and her belly shall swell, and this will happen. It's like, come on. It's very dramatic. It's sort of redundant and repeating and sort of dragging out this thing. And you're going, what? Get to the end of the story. And in essence, when Jesus was in that garden, it was a dragging out story too. Do you remember that? It just kept dragging out. And he would be praying, and blood would go to the disciples. You'd wake up, get awake. And he goes back and he prays and comes back, get awake. And, it's a big, long, drawn out story. And then finally, at the end, the Father's like, no comment there, you got to drink. So be it, Jesus said. And Jesus drank the cup of this wrath, this bitter drink in our place. Well, ending here tonight in verse 29 and 31, this is the law of jealousy. When a wife while under her husband's authority goes astray and defiles herself, or when the spirit of jealousy comes upon a man, and he becomes jealous of his wife, then he shall stand the woman before the Lord, and the priest shall execute this law upon her, and that man shall be free from the iniquity, but that woman shall bear her guilt.